Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about absolute value. So let's start with a definition. Absolute value of a number is its distance from zero. So we're really going to be thinking about number lines a lot here. How far is that number from zero? And it could be on the positive side of the number line or the negative side, but absolute value just says how far, how many steps is it away from zero. So when we're thinking about this, absolute value is never negative because distance is always positive, right? If we're thinking about a distance from zero, whenever you go somewhere, no matter which direction you're going, north, south, east, or west, you never say we're going negative 10 miles, right? It's always a positive number. So when we're finding absolute value, that's the thing we want to remember. It's always going to be positive or it could be zero, right? The absolute value of zero is zero because it's already at zero. It's 0 steps away from zero. So let's look at an example here with a number line because that's probably going to be helpful to you. So our first example here shows the absolute value of -6 and the absolute value of +6. So let's look down here. These symbols with the lines are what we use to show absolute value. They're just straight lines, right? So the absolute value of -6 is equal to 6 because -6 is 6 spaces away from zero. Doesn't matter that it's going towards the negative, it's still 6 spaces. And so our absolute value of -6 is +6. Just like the absolute value of +6 is also 6 spaces away. This time on the positive side of our number line. So the absolute value of +6 is also +6. So no matter what, if our number inside is negative or if it's positive, the distance away from zero is always positive, and it's the same amount as that actual number on the inside. Okay, let's look at another example. So I put this number line here so that we can think about some of these, but you're not really going to need it. You'll see it gets easy when you just do a couple of examples here. So the absolute value of -8. Again, we're thinking about how many steps away from zero is that number. But it's 0, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 steps. So the absolute value of -8 is +8. If we're thinking about a decimal, we're still thinking how far away from zero is that number. So 3.2, if we think about that on our number line, it's still 1, 2, 3, and then a little bit, right? It's going to be a little bit past 3, but it's 3.2 steps away from zero. So again, 3.2. Both of my numbers are positive. It didn't matter that I had a negative inside because our distance is always positive. The next two are a little bit different. When we have an operation inside of our absolute value, we have to do that first before we can find the absolute value. And you guys can use your calculators to help you with this. So double check, even if you think you know. But 3 minus 5 gives us -2. Well, the absolute value of -2, again, is 2 steps away from zero. So that would be +2. Here we have something a little bit different. Our first example, we had the negative inside of our absolute value. But this example, the negative is outside of our absolute value. So what we want to do is think about just the absolute value part without the negative. We're going to keep that negative on the outside, right? So the absolute value of 6, it's 6 spaces away from zero, so that would just be 6. But since we had that negative outside, we need to keep that negative and put it down onto our answer. So our answer here is -6. The absolute value is positive, but because we had that negative outside, our final answer is -6. All right, let's look at a couple other types of problems that they could ask you for absolute value. There's all of our answers there that we just talked about. But let's look at another example here. Okay, for these types of problems, we're going to complete these statements using our greater than, our less than, or our equal to sign. Just like we were doing with comparing and ordering fractions, decimals, percents, we need to solve each side of these and then fill in our symbol. So let's just take one side at a time. On this side of our little blank here, we have a negative outside of our absolute value, so we're going to keep that negative sign. Absolute value of 9 is 9, so this is actually the same as negative 9. Now, if our negative was inside, this would be a positive, but since it's outside, we keep our negative. This side doesn't have any absolute value to solve, so we're going to keep that as just a 9. And then we're going to decide which side is bigger, right? If we're comparing negative 9 and positive 9, they're not equal, right? One's negative, one's positive. And if one's negative, one's positive, our positive always has to be bigger. So we're going to fill in a less than sign. Negative 9 is less than positive 9. Our second example here, we're going to have to solve both sides again. So let's start on the left here. We have 7 minus 4 inside of our absolute value, so we need to figure out that first before we can take our absolute value. So 7 minus 4 is 3. The absolute value of positive 3 is still positive 3, right? It's 3 spaces away from 0. So now let's look at our other side. We have just a 7 inside the absolute value, so let's think about that. The absolute value of 7 is 7. We're going to bring our plus down. The absolute value of negative 4 is positive 4. So then 7 plus 4 gives us 11. And then if we're thinking about which one of these are bigger, they're both positives. And so 11 is bigger than 3. So again, 3 less than 11. Okay, so make sure you're solving each side before you're putting in your symbols. All right, our next example here. So this one is a little bit different. It says, what two numbers both have an absolute value of 1.5? Well, you need to think about your number line, right? If we're going to have an absolute value of 1.5, that means the distance from 0 has to be 1.5. And you have two options. You can go towards our positives or towards our negatives when you're at 0. So if you go to the positive 1.5 steps, you're going to end up at 1.5 or 1.5. So that's going to be one of our numbers. If you go towards the negatives, you can also go 1.5 steps, but this is going to be negative 1.5. So both positive 1.5 and negative 1.5 have an absolute value of 1.5. The next question says, what's the absolute value being shown on the number line? So first thing I'm going to do is draw my absolute value signs and then figure out what I'm finding the absolute value of. So if we're looking at the distance from 0 to whatever number they put on here. So from here, they're going from 0 to negative 8. So we're actually showing you the absolute value of negative 8. And we're showing that that's equal to positive 8. So even though we're going to negative 8, the absolute value of negative 8 is positive. So that's why they're showing you positive 8 steps on the top here. So absolute value of negative 8 is equal to positive 8 is what's being shown on our number line. And that's all you need to know about absolute value. So you're going to finish up the questions in your Edpuzzle, and then you'll do a practice assigned by your teacher.